All right, so joining me today is Mr. Paul Steinke. Paul has a master's in mental health counseling and is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Colorado and is simply one of the best counselors that I know. And I refer people to him all the time. Paul and I went to seminary at the same time. We had the same group of friends, and yet somehow we didn't ever meet during that time where our lives were overlapping, which is a real shame. We didn't meet until a few years after we were both done at seminary, which I think is a real shame because as anyone who knows Paul will tell you, your life is better after meeting Paul, and I wish I had done it sooner. But I'm excited to be able to do this and to see you and to talk to you today. So, Paul, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, as I mentioned to you before when we were setting this up, and as you're already well aware of because it's your day in and day out, the past year has tested everyone's mental health in ways and to degrees that many of us just haven't experienced before. So I wanted to book some of your time and have a conversation about mental health and ask you some questions from people within my community at TNL to hopefully begin that conversation about mental health in general and to address some specific concerns I think many of us will resonate with.
Yeah.
But before we dive into any of those questions, will you just take a few minutes and tell everyone about yourself, what you do, and why you do it?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first, thanks for the intro. I appreciate that. I think it's funny that we know a lot of the same people and it took us a long time to meet.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful that it finally happened, and it's always been a pleasure hanging out and having conversations. So I appreciate that a lot. So I work as a counselor down at Highlands Ranch. I work with a lot of couples and individuals, mostly adults. Deal with a whole variety of things. I do a ton of stuff around relationship and marriage, and dealing with like relationship issues across the whole spectrum. People are dating, engaged, married, remarried, going through crisis and things like that, and really just helping individual people deal with the struggles that they come across in their lives. So it's a whole smattering of stuff. I really got into it because prior to this life, I was a wedding photographer, and I realized that one, that was not a long-term sustainable career for me. And I didn't really enjoy it as much as I thought I would. Now, given the reality of COVID, I'm thankful that I'm not still doing that because it'd be real tough. I feel for a lot of people that I know who do photography. But in that process, I realized that what I wanted was to help people have lifelong relationships that were really healthy and sustainable, and not just being a part of like a single day of their marriage relationship journey, but helping people really develop relationships that could carry them through to the end of life, honestly. So that's what made the big switch for me to go into seminary and then getting my counseling degree and opening my practice.
That's awesome. Okay, so despite our best efforts, and when I mean humanity in general, but even you and I, there's still a pretty big stigma around seeing a counselor. So to help demystify that a bit, would you talk to us about what therapy with you actually entails? Like if I were a client sitting in your office, what would a counseling session be like? Yeah.
First, I'll say I totally get the stigma. I hear that, every so often from people. I mean, it's definitely gotten better. Younger generations, have made strides that way.
Yeah.
I hear a lot, from people how it feels like weakness or failure. And what I tell people is honestly, like walking through my door and sitting on the couch chair in my office is one of the most like courageous, brave things that you can do. And it takes a lot of courage and strength to step into a counselor's office and say, hey, I want to work on something that's hard in my life, and just admit that. So just want to reframe that first and say, hey, it's a step of bravery, courage, strength to come in and start to open up to an absolute stranger that you don't know about personal details of your life.
Right.
Which I also tell people is totally weird and unnatural. And it just is what it is, but it gets better. But on a practical level, a big piece of it is just sort of sitting down and kind of unloading, what's going on, what you're dealing with, what's the situation, what led you to reach out. And any counselor that me or someone else, you're an expert on your own life, and I'm just getting to know you. I don't know anything about you. So You're trying to give me a picture of kind of like what the struggle is. And my job is really try to understand that, ask good questions, get more details. And then it's formulating a plan and sort of moving forward and, offering some direction, perspective. That's how I look at it. Different people approach it different ways,
Sure.
different trainings, approach therapy different ways. But I'm a very engaged, interactive therapist. I have you work on stuff at home. We're going to jump into stuff in the office like right away. Like people are coming for a reason. Things aren't feeling great. They want to get better. So let's figure it out. Let's tackle it. I don't want to beat around the bush. And then my job is to point stuff out that you can't see or that you don't realize for yourself.
Yeah.
So help you sort of see the forest through the trees or what's behind, that we all have blinders on. And it's like, okay, what's back there that you're not aware of? And help you see and face that.
I love that. I really appreciate you mentioning the courage aspect of it. That's something that I think I've been trying to talk about a lot and really for 2021, one of my things has been pushing courage. And I agree with everything that you said, and I hadn't even really thought about how, or it's been a while since I've thought about how beginning counseling is such a huge step of courage. So
yeah. One of the things I'll say too is, a lot of people, this idea of weakness or I failed, or feeling fear or scared or uncomfortable. We don't need courage or bravery when things are fine. We don't need courage and bravery when we've got it. But courage and bravery is what we have that helps us overcome, the things that we're struggling with, the things that are hard, the things that we're afraid of, that allows us to go through those things and come out the other side, in a better place. So to look at it like that, I think is really critical.
I love that. Okay, so I have a mix of really practical questions and really big picture questions that I'm just going to hit you with if you're up for it.
Sounds great.
Okay, one of the first questions that I received that I thought was really great is, what are some everyday strategies to manage anxious thoughts?
That's a great question. So a couple first thoughts. One is to get the thoughts out of your head. So I always tell people, hey, our internal thought process is this hamster wheel that can go, and it lead us. It's like these trains in a station that are just coming and going and taking us here and there, and we have no control over it. So when we can get those thoughts out of our head, like write them down, actually put the words to them, make them explicit, on a piece of paper, or say those or speak those to someone. It allows us, one, to get off that internal train, but two, kind of like fact check or confront, like, is this realistic? Is this, real? Is it more irrational? Is there a rational aspect to it? To bring some of the truth to that versus what we internalize as our own truth or understanding or perspective. Yeah. So, that's just a really practical place to begin.
That's fantastic. Someone asked me something similar about 2 months ago. And, this is why you're the counselor and I'm not. I'll just leave it at that. So this next question hits close to home for me. I started taking medication during the pandemic to manage anxiety. Totally. It made a positive difference, but should I avoid relying on medication long term? So I have ADHD. I've been diagnosed for, I can't do math right now. Almost like 14 years. There it is, math, 14 years. And I have this love-hate relationship with, I love the fact that I live in a time where there's medication available that helps me think.
Totally. Yeah.
And I also feel like I kind of live in constant fear of what happens if I lose insurance, or what happens if that medicine just isn't available? Like, do I become a monster again? So in some ways I feel dependent on it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to really derail from that question, but specific to the pandemic and managing anxiety, people who have come on medication during this time, I don't know, what do you think about should they avoid staying on it long term?
So here's my 2 cents on medication, because I have this conversation with a lot of clients who are considering it, have a lot of feelings around it. Medication brings another stigma involved medication. It's funny because none of us are going to question, should I take Advil when I have a headache?
Right.
We're not going to question our dependency on food or water. or all the other medications that we take in our lives. But for some reason, when it comes to our emotions, like, ooh, this is super sketchy. So I take a approach from few different perspectives. One, I think there's a few of us in life that have whatever biological imbalance that we need medication to correct. I mean, I think that could be the same for like hypothyroidism, having a blood pressure issue. And it's like, hey, whatever it is, your body just doesn't function the right way, and medication help it function normally. And for some people, it's like, hey, they're going to be on that forever. So anyone who takes thyroid medication, you're probably not getting off of that.
Right.
It just is what it is. And so sometimes our emotions are not just a mental, this ethereal thing. It's connected to, physical aspects. So I think there's that one component. So you talk about ADHD, that I think sometimes that falls under that.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, medication is kind of like crutches. You're skiing one day, you fall, you break your leg. You need crutches to get around so you can do the physical therapy to heal your leg. And I take that approach for most people when it comes to medication. So you're anxious, you're depressed by whatever circumstances or what's going on, saying, okay, hey, let's use medication to get you to a place where you can function, get through life, hobble around on crutches, if you will, and then do the work that's underneath that to say, okay, why am I feeling this way? Why am I responding like this? Why is this impacting me? What's going on? And then see where that goes. And then maybe you don't need the crutches at some point. You let it be. But looking at that from that perspective to say, hey, I need this while I'm trying to figure out something else that's bigger. Yeah. So I totally get it. I mean, I've talked to a number of people who've gone on medication over the last year because it's just, the world is just crazy. And it's like, okay, how do I cope? But sometimes we get into a mental, emotional mindset where we just can't cope. We can't make good decisions. We can't do all the healthy things to get us out of the hole. So it's like, all right, let's get that bump up and then work on some other strategies and maybe some deeper issues and go from there.
That makes a lot of sense. I especially when it comes to things like depression and anxiety, I like the idea of that sort of being the baseline. Let's figure out how to get you to a, like you said, hobbling around place, and then let's work on whatever needs work.
If you can't function, then we got to at least get you functional. And then after that, hey, let's figure out all the other stuff so that you can actually thrive and not just feel like you're just surviving.
Yeah, I love that. I thought this is sort of we're going to take a pivot, but I thought this was a really great question. We are hearing a lot about self-care and taking care of yourself and loving yourself, which I think is important, but what are signs for when self-care goes too far and has moved into you simply just being selfish?
That's a big question.
Right.
Well, I think the first thing is to understand self-care. And I think sometimes it's easy to have maybe a bad interpretation or understanding of self-care. So self-care should be an active process that fills you up. It takes work. It's not checking out. It's not avoiding. It's, exercise takes an intentionality and, it's an active process. I think rest is an active process. Checking out's not resting. Resting takes work to rest in a way so that you feel better, be intentional around it. So I think we have to differentiate it. Is what I'm doing, is it checking out, avoiding, trying to not deal with, or am I actually trying to take care of myself? So I think that would be one. I think when it starts to bleed into, when it starts to feel selfish, then I'm questioning the motivation or, is it really self-care? Or is it, I just don't want to deal with you or this or that or the other thing. So, exercise is good, but if I'm doing it all the time and it's having a negative impact, in other areas of my life, that's not self-care. If it impacts my family or other relationships, that's not necessarily self-care.
Yeah.
So I think there's always a sort of dark side to where this thing that's good can turn and it feels actually is this really helping me? Is this doing good things for me? Then I think we need to look at why am I doing it that way or to that extreme or in that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned something that I think is interesting about the work that's required to actually rest. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So I think so I know for me, one of the things that self-care looks like for me is intentional downtime where I'm not looking at a screen. I'm not being bombarded by, data or information, I'm lying down, I'm taking a nap, I'm closing my eyes for like 45 minutes. I'm turning off distraction, I'm turning off stimulus, and it's being intentional around doing that, which can feel uncomfortable, or it can feel like, oh, I need to like listen to music to fall asleep or watch something to, no, I'm going to sit, I'm going to close my eyes, I'm going to be with what I'm feeling, with what I'm thinking, allowing things to be okay. Maybe that's, through some degree of prayer. But blocking off what I know is actually not necessarily good for me, or I need a break from. I think the same thing with, exercise, is being intentional around exercise of like, okay, I might do something harder, might do something lighter, taking like rest days, for example. You don't go out and hammer it every day, but it's like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to take it easy. I'm going to show up where I am, and, do something simple like that. There's an intentionality versus like, I'm going to plop down in front of the TV, watch a movie and check out, for an hour and a half. That's not bad, but if that's all I'm doing, that's not actually feeding myself. I need to do things that feed my soul, my body, my mental state, not lead me to not be here. So that's where intentionality is. It's getting more in touch with myself versus like just not being attuned and tuned into anything.
It almost feels like true rest is things that help you stay present, help you kind of wake up.
Yes. Yeah. Stay present, stay grounded. It doesn't mean you're not going to feel things that are uncomfortable, right? It doesn't mean you're not going to, you're going to get comfortable with the discomfort in a lot of ways. You're going back to sort of, I think that's sort of source of life. And I think, somebody talking, church, like, Christ being like the living water. It's like, yeah, how do I go to the living water? Well, it's an active engagement of that. It's not this passive thing. So it's got to be, there needs to be an active engagement process, I think, in real self-care. I think it requires saying no to something because I've said yes to this.
Yeah.
So if I'm not saying no, then I'm wondering like, hey, am I really caring for myself? It might feel like a little bit more work up front, but I know it's going to be fulfilling in the back end. So that might sound ethereal, vague, but that's how I conceptualize it.
Yeah. No. I think that's really helpful. So this is these next questions sort of branch out to beyond just ourselves. How can I support the mental health of the people closest to me, like my spouse or my roommates?
So I think a big thing is, one thing I tell people is vulnerability invites vulnerability. So when we share our own stuff in a vulnerable way, so not like projecting or dumping ways, but we say, you know what, I just realized like I've really been struggling and I'm finding myself just feel like more sad and down recently. I mean, that's being vulnerable, like talking about ourselves that way. It invites other people to be vulnerable. It creates safe space to be vulnerable. And I always think leading with vulnerability is a great way to invite other people into it so that we can, one, support them, two, be supported, and ultimately supporting each other.
Yeah.
Two, not being afraid to talk about it. If, just broaching the subject and saying, hey, it seems like this, I've noticed, you've been acting more this way. And I'm just, concerned. I'm just really wondering how you're doing, and taking that sort of risky initiative step to really ask, not just, are you okay, but speak to what you see is wrong, because if anyone asks you, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. That's what we do. Right. Versus saying, it just seems like you've been talking less recently and you've just been sleeping more, and I haven't seen you smile for a while. I'm just wondering, like, if you're feeling sad or depressed or just down, or if you're struggling. I mean, you go after what you see is the issue, which sounds super scary. I get it.
Yep.
But if you were struggling and you were having a really hard time, and would you want someone to kind of like, apprehensively move towards you, or to say, wow, like, you matter to me and I'm worried about you.
Yeah.
And I'm here. I want to hear about it. Like, that might be hard to step into at first, but I think that would feel pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a recurring thing that's been coming up for me the past few months, but it's the people that are willing to say the hard things to me that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that those people care about me. And
you said something important, that they care about you. So it needs to come from a caring, concerned place. It can't become from a self-motivated place. So of course, if you're married to someone, your spouse is struggling, like, your needs won't be getting met. So if you come to them complaining, like, and you're just not present and you're not engaged, and why aren't you here for me? Okay, that's not concern. That's self-motivated versus, I really am worried about you. I'm putting myself aside. I'm worried about you. You matter to me. not what I'm not getting from you or what that is.
Yeah, that makes it. Yeah, that's an important distinction. In a similar vein, this is something that I'm just beginning to think about as my kid is growing up, but how can I foster mental health in our kids at home?
So I'd say the biggest one, and this is something my wife and I do with our kids, is help them talk about the feelings that they have, give them emotional language, teach them how to identify and express what they're feeling. So when they throw a tantrum, it's things like, man, it sounds like you're mad. It sounds like you're frustrated. Tell me what you're frustrated about. Oh, okay. We didn't give you what you wanted. Well, that sounds sad. Do you feel sad? Yeah, I feel sad. Do you feel like we don't love you? Yeah, it feels like you don't love me. Okay. And help them have words, because when I work with adults, most of us didn't grow up with the best models and examples of like emotional language and being able to like put words to that, or we grew up in families where flat out it wasn't okay to feel things. We don't know what to do. So helping our kids, like, and creating a space where they can talk about how they feel without repercussion, without issues like that. We always tell kids, like, you're never going to get in trouble for telling us how you feel. You might get in trouble for things that you've done, but if you explain and say, hey, like, I was feeling sad, so I did X, Y, or Z, it's like, wow, I totally get that you're feeling sad. Next time, tell me, instead of throwing something and breaking it,
Right.
Giving them that outlet for that, and especially the language for it is I think is a huge start. And then also encouraging them to ask for help when they're struggling. Say, hey, it's okay to ask for help when you're struggling, or if you feel something, or if you don't know what to do, or, come talk to us. We will be there for you, and then show up. Right.
Man, I think that's a fantastic reminder for all of us who are taking care of kids. To help give them that language. I mean, as soon as you started saying that, I wasn't anticipating this. I started getting emotional, like, holy cow. Like, yeah, like, that's what I wanted. And that's what I want. That's what I want to give my kid, is that ability to process those emotions in a place where there aren't repercussions for feeling a certain way, where gosh, I can't even imagine what my life would have been like if I had grown up with some, and my parents, I'm not throwing my parents under the bus. They did what they could, but just that kind of emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. And emotional intelligence can be taught. I mean, we can teach, we can help people, you can develop in it. But we always tell our kids, like, it's okay to feel what you feel. It's not okay to behave certain ways when you feel that way, but your feelings are okay. It's okay to feel mad, sad, scared, frustrated, annoyed, yada, yada, yada. It's not okay to break stuff when you're mad.
Right.
So teaching them what's an appropriate way to handle their emotions and talk about it. And then as they get older, right, talking a bit more, you get deeper. I mean, so I've got younger kids, and that's where we start as they get older, trying to get a little bit deeper and understanding motivation and some of those deeper needs and desires that they have, to try to put words to them. And also that it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to feel these things. I mean, we all do as adults.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. To some degree, you're experiencing the same things as kids. You just have less handles.
Yeah, exactly.
This might be a silly question. Do you ever use the wheel of emotion with your kids?
We haven't, but when they get older, and maybe we would, but we haven't. But we just we've started to put words to some of the big emotions, the primary ones that they feel a lot. Our oldest is reading more, so at some point I'm going to say, "Hey, read this and tell me what you feel." But yeah, we're not quite there yet.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there were a few questions submitted in the same vein as this next one. But what are some healthy boundaries for relationships that are mentally and emotionally draining?
So here's my sort of like 2 minute boundary sort of like primer. The boundaries are, number one, meant to protect you. Okay, so they're not meant to change someone else's behavior or control or get to do something. They're meant to protect yourself. And, so it's like countries have boundaries. They're meant to define ourselves, define our borders, and protect us. So we have to look at it that way. So if there's something that's unhealthy, or there's someone that's unhealthy around you, the boundary is to say, okay, what would take care of me with this thing or this person or this issue that's unhealthy? Okay, so that's number one. And looking at it like that from a position of protection, it has a potential to influence and change behavior, but that's not the primary goal. So when we think about protecting, the question is, what do I need to protect, from this person? What about myself do I need to protect or take care of that this person is not respecting or not taking care of or hurting, to identify that. So that's a sense of like, one of my values is being treated with respect and having conversations that are, mutual and listening and in adult life. Well, someone's not doing that. It might be saying, hey, I'm not going to have certain conversations with you, or I'm not going to talk about certain topics with you. And you don't have to communicate that, but it might be just saying, no, I'm just not going to go there because it's not safe for me. So that would be a sort of like a minor level, but you have to start with what is it you need? What are you protecting? What do you need to take care of? And then what's the boundary that's gonna take care of that thing, that part of you?
That makes sense. What would you say to someone who struggles feeling like putting up any boundary is selfish on their part?
So, read in the New Testament, Jesus set boundaries all the time, and he didn't seem too bothered by it. He disappointed people, and people didn't like the things that he didn't do or did. And he seemed like it was okay. So Christ modeled boundaries for us. I think especially as Christians, we often think, well, I've just got to say yes. I've got to be a doormat. That's what it's like. That's absolutely just not biblical. Christ didn't model that. He said no to people. He put things out there that disappointed people or they didn't like to hear. And there was pushback. And he said, look, this is what it is. So I think remembering that is really important. Now, it's doing it respectfully and tactfully, obviously. But the other part is what I tell people is like, well, why is it that your needs and your feelings are selfish, but everyone else gets to feel and need whatever they want? Like that doesn't add up, I think that's where we look at the systems we grew up in, all those kind of things that led us to believe that. But it's saying, well, if this is important to me, I get to speak for that. I get to identify that. And sometimes I need to take care of that and protect that. And, getting comfortable with that part to actually consider yourself. So, everyone falls on a different area of the spectrum. That some of us have a really hard time considering ourselves. Some of us have no problem at all, but it's learning to grow in that in a healthy way.
Yeah, that's good. I love this next question, and I'm glad that I'm not being asked to answer it necessarily because I feel like it's something that you could spend. I feel like I spent months with a counselor on this question. What's a healthy way or process to deal with failure?
That is a great question. So the first thing that comes to mind is to remember that failure is not indicative of who you are. It's something that you're going through. Okay, so to separate your personhood from the event. All right, because failure is a great sort of starter for shame, or it can tap into shame. It can go like from, oh, this failed or that didn't work, to I am this way.
Yes. And
so I think we need to be really careful to say attach behavior, events, circumstances to personhood. That's where we get into really big trouble with shame. Number two is I talk, I share this example with people a lot, but anyone who's ever been around little kids, when they move from like crawling to walking, it's not like one day they just walk. Okay. They pull themselves up and they fall down. They pull themselves up and they fall down. That is failure. I can't do it. And they keep going. It's not like, I fell once, I'm never going to walk. I'm just going to crawl the rest of my life. Like that's absurd. They persevere, they move through that, they try something different, they keep going. It's a learning experience. So I think to remember that, hey, failing, some failures or situations are really big and the consequences might be bigger, but it doesn't mean that we can't learn, we can't grow. Sometimes we make really big mistakes. Doesn't mean we can't move forward. Some are harder than others. Little kids aren't beating themselves up for not being able to walk. As adults, it's a bit hard because we carry a lot more shame,
right?
So recognizing, like, am I bringing shame into this? What's the reality? you read any of those books out there, it talks about people failing, successful people, how many times they failed, Thomas Edison, the light bulb, and all that stuff. I mean, it's an opportunity to persevere, to learn, and to grow, but to be very careful that we don't allow shame to take hold and build, because that's when we get into trouble, and that's when we get stuck. When we say it's like, well, I am this way. Well, then I'm never going to do anything if this is who I am, and that's problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really. You almost just answered it. Well, you did just answer it, but can you talk more about shame and sort of how we can, how do we identify shame as opposed to like a healthy awareness of things being wrong?
Yeah. So I have this conversation a lot with people, the difference between shame and guilt. So guilt, I did something wrong. I came up and I kicked you, and that wasn't very nice because I was angry. That was wrong. Okay. I can apologize for that and move on. Shame is a sense I'm bad. There's something wrong with me. I don't measure up. I'm not enough. I'm inadequate in some way. And shame always comes with two components. It has this predictive component that says, oh, if you do this, or because you did that, like something bad is going to happen. You'll be judged. You'll be rejected. Someone will find out. That will not go well for you. So there's the prediction, and there's a reactive component that says, okay, so you should keep that to yourself. You should go hide. You should do something passive aggressive, aka don't put yourself out there. So if you put yourself out there, it's going to go bad. So hide yourself. That's shame. It's the self-deprecating, the putting yourself down. It's like, man, there's something wrong with me versus I did something wrong.
Yeah.
And there's, we all experience like a healthy sense of like embarrassment or shame. And sometimes it's like, oh, that was really bad. I shouldn't have done that. I feel kind of stupid, but we can get past it, but it's the ones that just take hold of like, I am this. And it's usually older messages, things that have been there for a while. It's not like the first time, as adults, we've all done stuff that's kind of dumb, but we don't have a deep wound around it. So we can get on. It doesn't define us.
Yeah.
But it's the ones where it's like, wow, this feels familiar. And this has been here for a little while, probably got developed when we were younger and didn't have our great brains we have now to work through it. So, but that's the biggest difference.
How do you help people work through those wounds that are from years ago that if they happen today wouldn't be a big deal, but because we were at where we were at, it's life altering in some ways. I
totally.
I think of a couple people that I know that can identify it and can tell you exactly like, yeah, I know this is what happened, and I know that that's how it makes me, like, I know the trajectory that it put me on.
Yep.
What's the next step beyond that? They still feel sort of imprisoned by it.
Yeah. So the big thing is that, in a normal moment, we can put words that we can talk about it, but when it gets triggered, we tend to sort of revert back to our younger selves or some of those times we don't have that as strong adult self. Maybe, our ego strength isn't as strong, our adult sense of it being an adult isn't there, especially when we're younger, we don't have that adult brain. And really it's learning to keep our current adult self sort of, engaged and aware in the moment. So you do something and that feeling comes up, and to not just sort of like devolve into that younger little kid, but to say, oh my gosh, there's that thing. There's that feeling, there's this old wound. Okay, I know what that's about, and try to stay more grounded and present to allow things to go, to pass, and then do some of the deeper exploring work on, what's the wound about? What did you need? What didn't you get? I mean, there's a lot of things around that. The big starting place is really to work on staying present in the present, and not just sort of going back to this old place and letting the reaction happen, which sometimes is easier said than done.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a question that popped in my mind, and I'm not even sure necessarily how to formulate it. But is there, as you've been talking with clients over this past year, are there some trends that you're, I don't know, more aware of or concerned about that it might be helpful to just have people be in general keeping their eyes out for?
Yeah. So I think a big one is, COVID has introduced a massive amount of like uncertainty into our lives. And I'd say we, especially in the US, really don't like uncertainty. We don't like being out of control. I really feel like we live in a culture that says, hey, you can control your life. You can do the things that you want to do. You have the power. And this is just really showing us that we don't. And in some really big ways, which, I mean, frankly, just feels awful. And it feels vulnerable and scary. And with that, because of the way that COVID works, our coping mechanisms have been taken away. The healthy ones, we've lost access to community, or that's been threatened or minimized. So we're facing like all this uncertainty in easily much more in isolation, or more in a disconnected way, in which I think we've already got a somewhat disconnected society where we don't do as well lean on each other as maybe some other societies and cultures do. And then for those of us who are married, and stuck at home with our spouses all the time, or with someone else who's struggling, who's got the same things going on, and the lack of support. So the needs go up, the ability to meet them goes down. And that's just a recipe to not technically speaking, not do well. So I think to be able to extend some grace to ourselves and one another, say, look, like this is a really hard, unprecedented, time in our lives, with some huge consequences, and has impacted like many, many areas, for some people more than others. So you're going to be struggling, and that's okay. Two is to start to focus on what can you control? What do you have some influence over? So we can't necessarily control what COVID does, but we can control our response to it. We can't necessarily control the feelings that we have, but we can control what we do when those emotions come up. Engaging in the community that's available to us, even though it's not ideal. So learning to shift some of our expectations and say, hey, this isn't what I prefer, but it's what I need, and look at it in the smaller moments. So I just see, people struggling as a whole in a lot of different ways. Relationships, I sort of joke with couples, nobody signed up to spend 24/7 with their spouse. Like we never thought about that when we got married. That may have sounded awesome at one point, but that was not our lifelong plan. So like, hey, this is really, really tough. I think too, one of the things that I see, especially with couples, is it's bringing up issues that have been there all along, but now that you're in the same space all the time, it's really bringing them to the surface. And you have a choice to kind of like, hey, we really want to tackle these and deal with them or not, because they're going to come up, so I see that happening. For single people, just this sense of isolation and disconnect is really challenging. Talked to a lot of single people about dating. Like dating in today's world sounds more frustrating than I think it's been for a while. Imagine. It's just horrible. So, and again, not letting that see that as a personal issue, not going like, well, it's me, there's something wrong with me. Saying, look, this weird time to try to get to know somebody else, and, being single, it's a hard, it's hard to be with your spouse all the time. It's hard to be with nobody all the time. So the isolation, the loneliness, I hear a lot of that. And just the lack of quality time with other human beings, be it with your spouse that you're living with all the time or alone living with nobody. There's not a lot of quality time with anybody else. And we need that. So I see that issue.
Gosh, yeah. I think this is a lot of what you were touching on, but I think we in America really underestimate how much we need each other. And this year I don't even know if people realize like half the crazy thoughts that are going on in my head are just because I'm so isolated.
Yeah.
Do you have any, what do you, I don't know, what do you tell people that feel that level of isolation in COVID times?
Yeah. I mean, one, affirming it, validating it, it's totally legitimate. It's just like, this is really true. And then trying to identify, okay, what are those needs? What aren't you getting? Try to make that really explicit and say, okay, what are little ways, albeit imperfectly, can you start to move towards that happening? So it's like, hey, this might be ideal. It might not be ideal, but if this is what you've got, then let's work with what we have. And so it's a time not to think about like maximizing. It's just a time to think about, doing what we can, which I think is a big framework shift for a lot of people.
Yeah. So I know, sorry, were you about to say something?
No.
Oh, I got all excited. I was like, oh, don't cut him off. I know a handful of people that have gone through some really big loss this year, losing loved ones, relationships ending, miscarriages.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like, so I guess my question is twofold, because it feels like, I don't know, those are impossible things to go through when you can have people around.
Right. Yep.
In a lot of ways, sometimes I don't know what to offer people when I can't, even give them a hug.
Right. Yep.
And I don't necessarily know where to direct them
Yeah.
to get what they need. Can you speak to that at all? I know that's kind of nebulous, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I would agree. I mean, I've got clients who've been through things in 2020 that, I mean, on top of 2020, they're just, it's like unreal that it's all coming together at the same time.
Yeah.
Just really, really hard things that feel like disproportionate, like how is this all happening now? And it's really tough because there's all these norms that we will do, right? If you lose somebody, you have a celebration of life, you come together. Well, that's restricted and you can't do it in the way that you want. And, reaching out to people when you're struggling, and it's like, well, you can't get a hug, you can't have someone's presence. I mean, there's not a good answer. I mean, it's back to you kind of do what you can. You reach out to people that you can. I tell people like, hey, like set up recurring times, just like talk. I mean, everyone's tired of Zoom and the phone or whatever. It's like, well, okay, we can be tired of it, or we can lean into it and accept and say, hey, this is what we've got right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know that's really hard. I'm not the best at accepting the things that I don't like. And it's like, I'd like to be able to change it, but I can't change some of this. We can't sit down in person and do the things we want to do. So it's like, well, you know what? I'm going to surrender my expectation and some of those desires, and I'm going to do at least something that's good and that's positive for me.
Yeah.
And let that be enough. Because this is just what it is. So I think I'd say the biggest thing that, I mean, I've personally learned and continue to work through and talk to people about, but it's we have to shift expectations of life. And that means there's grieving. That means there's disappointment, none of which we want to do. Say, wow, this stinks and this is disappointing. Okay, I'm going to grieve that. I'm going to feel that. And then I'm going to move towards the options that I do have. And instead of going, I got to do this again, saying, hey, I get to do this. I get to live in a country where we get to at least connect virtually in certain ways, or we do have some of those outlets. So it's like move towards gratitude, which is really hard when a lot has been taken away.
Yes.
So, and I'm not dealing with some of the horrific stuff that other people are dealing with. So
right.
I can, that's even harder.
Yep.
But we've got to work towards accepting living in reality versus pushing against it and railing against it, because we can't change it. We don't have the power to do that.
Yeah.
And that's really tough. So there's a lot of surrender that needs to happen.
Gosh. Yeah.
Which I'm by no means an expert at.
Be nice if you were. You could tell us all.
I'm not a poster child for surrender. Push, and you will make it happen. It's like, no, sometimes you just can't.
Right.
You've got to say, I can't make happen what I want to make happen. So how do I surrender, and what do I need to do differently?
Yeah.
So I could get a whole theological conversation about that, which I won't do right now. But
maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
I think make this the last question. Based on kind of what you had just been saying, how do I want to phrase this? When we're walking alongside someone that is going through grief, where like there just isn't, like there's nothing you can do about it to some degree. Like
right.
I told someone recently, like grief just takes time, and it's something that you just kind of have to let happen to you, and it comes in waves, and you just kind of have to ride the wave. But is helping, you mentioned like helping people, well, I don't even know if you phrased it this way, but helping people see what they can do or what their options are, like how it's almost like is a way to process grief, reclaiming our agency. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm glad that you are good at listening to people and can interpret what they're saying.
Is the question like, how do you process grief in a good way, or what are some helpful ways to process or go through grief?
Listen, there it is. Yes. So much better. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So people talk about stages of grief, right? Sadness, anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance. And we think, it's this linear process. It doesn't work like you said. It's these cycles and these circles. And what I tell people is anger, bargaining, denial keep us stuck. Okay. They're also the three things that keep us from feeling all the sadness.
Wow.
Okay. And acceptance is the hard part to get to. And so I think, we're going to be angry. We're going to bargain. We're going to deny. I mean, that is normal. That is natural. That is okay. We have to start to move towards the sadness. We have to move towards what the loss reel is, that really is the pain, and sort of bounce between those. So, there's no timeline. By the beginning, you're going to get a lot more anger, bargaining, denial, sad kind of feelings. We're tired of feeling sad. Anger feels safe. Denial feels nothing. Bargaining is trying to somewhere in the middle. But as we sort of work through that, being able to put words like, what am I angry about? What am I denying? What is hard for me to accept? And what's sad about those things? And we sort of move the cycle that way and to sit more with the sadness, more with the emotion, which helps us move acceptance. We're going to come back to those other feelings because it's just so hard to accept some of these things. It's like, I don't have a framework for this. I don't have a context for that. But being able to go through it that way, putting more words to it, slowing down, and getting comfortable with the discomfort. There's a lot of that right now. It's like we need to get comfortable with discomfort because we can't escape it. We can try, but it's not going to go anywhere. Yeah. So I'd say the other thing when you're walking with people, anybody who's in a relationship with someone who's grieving, the number one thing you can do is just ask them about their grief. Tell me about your grief today. What are you feeling sad about today? We're all afraid that, I don't want to bring it up. It's never gone. They're feeling it all the time. Yeah. So you're not like creating more grief.
Reminding them.
You're not reminding them. They haven't forgotten.
Right.
Okay. Go ask. It's like, I know you're sad. What are you sad about today? What are you missing? What are you struggling with? Move towards it, because grief is so isolating. Everyone's afraid of making someone feel a certain way. Don't leave them isolated. Just go after them and ask them and talk to them and have them tell you about their grief. Yeah. They will appreciate it.
Yes. I love that.
Otherwise, they're going to teach you how to do it. So I tell people a lot of times who are grieving, like, you have to teach your friends how to help you grieve and how to relate to you while you're grieving. Really stinks, which is so awful, versus like, just go ask,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, gosh, I've been on both sides of that. And I definitely see people when people are in their kind of moment of most need, they feel most abandoned because just no one wants to make them feel bad. Yeah. It's super uncomfortable. Yeah. And you feel like you're the one bringing it up in them. But I think what you said is so important. Like they're feeling it. If you're thinking about it, there's no way they're not.
Exactly.
And the best thing you can do is move towards it. I think that is, gosh, I want to
and then keep doing it, because, like, our experience of other people's grief is really short. It passes quick. We go out to our lives. They're carrying a little bit a lot longer. Yeah. So, grief, when people are grieving up front, there's like a heavy support up front, and then it falls off. People who are grieving need people to keep walking with them. So a month, 2 months, 3 months, a year later, we've got friends who've lost people, and I've got reminders on my phone on certain dates and anniversaries to reach out and say, hey, think about you guys today. I can't imagine how hard this is. I'm sure you still miss so-and-so or whatever. Yeah. You're not alone, and you keep doing it.
Gosh, that's such a great way of really tangibly loving someone. You can do right now. It's just a text. Yeah. It's just a phone call.
It's easy.
But that's a profound difference to someone who's paralyzed by that grief. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's great. Yeah. Well, Paul, thanks for the time today. I really enjoyed this. I really appreciate your thoughts and your insights and your expertise. And I hope that this is just the beginning of more conversations and more questions that, we can throw around together.
Oh yeah. Really. Likewise. Really enjoyable. Love talking about it. Thankful you're doing it. There's a lot of need for that. So happy to be a part of it.
I'm going to drop however we put this video out, I'm going to drop your information so
Sure.
that people can get in touch with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tell people often when I refer them to you that if it doesn't feel like a good fit, you probably know of other people to refer them to.
Totally. What I tell people is like, hey, I know a lot of different people. I know what I'm good at and what I'm not. People reach out and say, I'm dealing with this. I will point you in the direction of the person who I think is best. If that's me, fine. If that's not me, it's no skin off my back, but I want people to see the person who's best for them. So I'm happy to go between or whatever that looks like, or help someone get connected to somebody else.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And
you're welcome.
Hopefully we'll talk again soon.
That'd be great.